Welcome back to Arise Review. Kenya is holding national days of mourning and striking back against the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. 148 people, mostly students, were slaughtered when Somali militants rampaged through Garissa University. The government says they have arrested some of the Al-Shabaab gunmen and that others are being questioned. In Africa is Arise correspondent Pryia Sridhar. Pryia, welcome to Arise Review as always. President Kenyatta is promising to respond in the severest way possible, and his Air Force is striking Al-Shabaab bases inside Somalia. Is that just the beginning of a stepped-up offensive against these terrorists?
Well, this offensive has actually been going on since 2011, and one thing that the Kenyan military really wants to stress is that the airstrikes that started yesterday were not in response to this incident. Already, Al-Shabaab has said that after this incident at Garissa University, that there could be more bloodshed in Kenya. And really what this group is angry about is the fact that Kenyan military and African Union troops have been operating in Somalia. So this is one of those situations where it's really tit for tat, where the Kenyan military has to be really careful that when they continue these airstrikes on those two Al-Shabaab bases just across the border in Somalia, that they have to at least make it appear that this is part of the ongoing operation and not in response, because they don't want any retaliatory attacks to happen again. This region has a very porous border, and it's really interesting because already one of the local politicians in the province on the border of Kenya and Somalia, where this attack took place, has said that he actually wants the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to reevaluate the refugee camps across the border in Kenya. There's about 300 to 400,000 Somali refugees which have essentially been displaced because of the Al-Shabaab insurgency. But unfortunately, Kenyan intelligence and the military really believe that a lot of these refugee camps are actually being diluted with militants who are using that area and those connections to plan further attacks in Kenya. This isn't the first attack we've seen Al-Shabaab make in Kenya. We also saw the infamous Westgate Mall incident where several people died as well. And they're using the same tactics that we've seen before, separating the Christians and the Muslims and killing the Christians. It was really horrific. A lot of the people who should have been celebrating Easter for the past few days are now mourning the loss of their loved ones.
Pryia, thank you so much for that report. We're going to add to this discussion Dr. Raymond Gilpin. He's with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Dr. Gilpin, welcome to Arise Review. Al-Shabaab says their attacks are in response to Kenya sending peacekeeping troops to Somalia and to the mistreatment of Muslims. What's the history here?
No, Al-Shabaab has had a long history of terrorist attacks in the region. It started going way back to the Union of Islamic Courts, when Al-Shabaab was actually the youth wing of the Union of Islamic Courts. And that crisis was never really resolved. And so what started off as local and Somali grievances have become sub-regional. Yes, there's a sense in which they do say they're responding to Kenyan and African Union operations in Somalia. I think, but the real reason, the crux of the matter, is stability in Somalia. Without stability in Somalia, we would see groups like Al-Shabaab and other offshoots continue to proliferate and cause mayhem across the border in countries like Kenya.
You know, Doctor, no one can underestimate, and I'm going to underscore here, probably one of the central reasons and keys for this is religious or ethnic violence or opposition, Muslim against Christians. We, of course, saw it here in this latest attack. That being the case, I'm just wondering here, and what we've seen in northeastern Nigeria, do you think there might be any attempt here for some of these groups to gel? ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram?
Yeah, we've heard the Boko Haram leader, Mohammed Shekau, pledge allegiance to ISIS. And we've also heard a lot of talk about connections between Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda. But the reality is that in most of these areas, whether it's in northeastern Nigeria or in and around Somalia, it's a small group of extremists that are instrumentalizing political and socioeconomic issues and using religion as as a pedestal to justify what really are terrorist actions. It's not really an interreligious rift. It's basically these small groups of disaffected young people in these countries using religion as an excuse.
You know, Dr. Gilpin, you effectively segued into our next topic here in Africa. And of course, that's Nigeria, contending with terrorism there. And despite threats by Boko Haram to disrupt the recent elections, which were hotly contested and perhaps pretty close. Now, Nigeria now has a new president, of course, Muhammadu Buhari. And so far, the transfer of power has been relatively peaceful. But all the political campaigning is not over yet. Nigeria's newspaper This Day reports the All Progressive Congress and the People's Democratic Party still are vying for position in governors and state house races, all those local little things going on over there, as many countries have. And there's a lot at stake with Africa's biggest economy in the balance. Still with us, of course, is Dr. Raymond Gilpin. And Sarah is joining us also from Lagos. Are they still celebrating in Lagos, Sarah?
Well, certainly a great sense of pride here in Nigeria that the presidential elections went off by and large pretty peacefully. We're in that sort of strange period at the moment, the transition period before you actually have the power handed over. But with all the excitement and anticipation of the presidential election, it can be easy to forget that it's not over yet. In fact, less than a week away, on April 11th, you've got the gubernatorial elections being held. Now, they're really crucial because this is where you've got the race for the governorships. And the governors of the 36 states in Nigeria, they hold quite a lot of sway. They're the ones who decide when revenue, when financing is given to each state, how that's then divided up. And they also have a real impact when it comes to security and policies that are made in those states. So really very critical. You've still got campaign posters up everywhere for the governorship races. And everyone very excited about that because like the presidential elections, what you've got with the governors is that they're limited to those 2 4-year terms. So this is the time, this election, when actually a lot of the big names, a lot of the big governors that have held power until now are at the end of that period. So you're going to get a lot of changes afoot. Perhaps not the international headline-grabbing stuff of the presidential election, but as they say, it's always the quiet ones to look out for. And it really feels like there are going to be big changes afoot with these gubernatorial elections.
And perhaps there may be some surprises along the way. Sarah, Dr. Gilpin, I want to go back to you. General Buhari is well known in Nigeria. His influence there spans across decades, I think at least 30 years. That being the case, with all that is at stake right now, and the Nigerian people have made their choice, how strong is President-elect Buhari's party across the entire country?
I think what we saw in the elections was a triumph.
Well, again, it's very divided. You have had the opposition candidates, the APC party, in power in the governorship positions. And what you also had in the lead up to the presidential elections were a lot of defections from big name governors. So that certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons, if you like, in the lead up to the presidential election. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that power is carved up. Here in Lagos, for example, you have a very, very fierce race, and it's thought that the APC are going to get a governor in position. We've actually interviewed both the gubernatorial candidates, and they're fighting just as fiercely as the presidential candidates were fighting. So it really is, again, a very close-run thing, but that is going to be absolutely critical. The PDP are going to be taking some states, the APC are going to be taking other governorships. It'll be how, though, when the final results are in, how the 36 states are carved up, and that really will either give Buhari and his administration that much-needed boost, or you could see some quite interesting divides there as well. So, you know, a lot still to play for.
Dr. Buhari, Gilpin, I'm sorry, that question actually was meant for you, but that's okay. Sarah has answered it effectively here. I want to move on to some other things that we want to cover here. Of course, the stock market has been rallying. Is that expected to continue in Nigeria? Dr. Gilpin?
Well, I think it's a huge boost, isn't it? And it's certainly something that in the lead up to the elections, you had a lot of economists looking at very closely. You've had a lot of economic instability here in Nigeria, and that's really hurt voters where it matters, in their pockets. And I think now that you've seen the presidential elections go off, of course, 1 or 2 hitches, but viewed internationally certainly as being very democratic, transparent, and going across very smoothly. And so you've seen that boost in the market almost immediately after the news that Muhammadu Buhari is Nigeria's next president-elect.
Sarah Firth, I want to thank you so much for your insight. I want to move back now to Dr. Gilpin, who's been waiting patiently in our nation's capital here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Gilpin, I want to ask you overall about this election here. The last time around, 1,000 people were killed in, I guess, in sectarian violence in Nigeria. This time, things went pretty smoothly. What does this election say about the maturity of Nigeria as a democracy?
No, I think it says a lot about the triumph of process over personalities, and also it says a lot about the path on which Nigeria seems to be embarking. I think it's one in which you're having a lot more civic engagement, one in which people are voting the issues, not so much the personalities, and one in which there is a real resounding strong call for change. If you look at elections like the Lagos elections, we see a real drop in turnout. We see a lot of the PDP voters not turning out, and we see people sending a clear message. You asked a question earlier about the stock market. Yes, it's rallied, but I think one thing that is clear is that the President-elect Buhari will have a very short honeymoon. He really has to do three things almost immediately. Articulate a strategy to ensure security, not just in the Northeast, but also in the Delta. He also has to ensure that he addresses the big issue of corruption. And the third is socioeconomic inequality. That really has to be addressed if Nigeria, being Africa's largest economy, is going to matter. And that's what his political fortune is going to be hinged upon. The elections are the first step, but he has a lot of work to do in the coming weeks.
Okay, Dr. Raymond Gilpin, I want to thank you so much for your patience, sir, and we'll certainly bring you back for more discourse on this important topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, how the civil war in Yemen can have a big impact on the world balance of power. And of course, you're watching Arise Review.